I'm Christopher C. York, instructor of philosophy at Langara College.
And I'm Zan Plesner. I'm a student at Langara College.
And this is Synthesis and Sophistry. Today's topic in our required reading subsection of season 2, we're going to be looking at In Praise of Idleness, the article by Bertrand Russell. This is one of the sort of pre-World War II articles by Russell, and it's aimed towards a general audience. And if you had to, Zan, sum up Russell's thesis in one pithy sentence, what would it be?
I would say the thesis of this article is that we should have a 4-hour work week and we should stop fetishizing hard work.
Yes, exactly. I was going to suggest that instead of In Praise of Idleness, it should be entitled In Praise of a 4-Hour Work Week. However, right, I mean, if you looked at the technology of his day, maybe by his calculations, a 4-hour work week would be the ideal. That may have been further diminished by now. I assume it has been. Maybe one day we'll get to the 15-minute work week, or work day, sorry. And, as we discussed, you might get to a disappearing point where there's a 0-hour workday, which would be some version of utopia and some version of hell on another sort of interpretation of it. But let's stick with Russell's proposal, which still represents a significant diminishment of labor as we currently encounter it. So let's say that, we could take the amount of work that needs to be done by humanity and divide it equally among the population. Russell thinks this would solve the following problem. The problem that we have masses of unemployed lumpen proletariat, right, that don't have anything to do, and we have an overworked laboring class which is starved for the goods of leisure. So this multiplies the number of social problems that he thinks he can give the goods of leisure to everyone if we're able to sort of divide the amount of work equally amongst the population, regardless of whether they're property owning or not property owning. What do you think of this proposal?
Yeah, I mean, it's one that I was kind of nodding my head along the whole time. This is a topic that's close to my heart. I've kind of always held that our culture overvalues work in itself, and there's a certain absurdity to it, the amount of hours we put into our work. And he another topic that's close to my heart, he goes after landlords as people who are kind of taking the idleness that would be people who are overworking themselves as their own, and both parties end up not benefiting as much as they could. One is overworked, one isn't partaking in meaningful work. I think it's a fairly balanced, maybe a bit idealistic approach, but one that I am in favor of.
Yeah, I think he demonstrates this best when he does his deconstruction of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. This would be on our page 5. He talks about the pin manufacturing concern, right? And he says, like Adam Smith's example of the pin straightener, right? Sort of that, having that as their sole occupation means they can become exponentially more productive and produce more pins. However, he says that men can make twice as many pins perhaps in this way, but pins are already so cheap that hardly any more will be bought at a lower price. In a sensible world, everybody concerned in the manufacturing of pins would take to working 4 hours instead of 8, and everything else would go on as before. But in the actual world, this would be thought demoralizing. The men still work 8 hours, there are too many pins, Some employers go bankrupt, and half the men previously concerned in making pens are thrown out of work. There is, in the end, just as much leisure as on the other plan, but half the men are totally idle, while half are still overworked. In this way, it is ensured that the unavoidable leisure shall cause misery all around, instead of being a universal source of happiness. Can anything more insane be imagined? Right? So here he's demonstrating not only the violence that an obsession with work does to one's own interest, but to society more generally, the wasteful overproductiveness of the hyper-efficient machinery of the industrial revolutions. Just making, let's say, it's a machine that's lost sight of what its original function was, which was for the raising up of humans and the creation of, let's say, more constructive leisure time. But as a fellow who has a semester off will attest, too much leisure time can be a burden. So that's the sort of strike against the leisure class. But it's kind of funny. I mean, Russell identifies that so much of the leisure class has not driven social progress, but that leisure is a sort of necessary element for the production of culture, right? It's the cradle of civilization.
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting elevation of leisure.
Yeah. I liked that he pointed this out, because he was talking about how, exactly, leisure is the way that we're able to think about these big ideas. Philosophy is only done because there's time to think about things. This is why in the past it's mostly been old white dudes. But he talks about how wasteful it is to have a small leisurely class that all they have is leisure, because the chances of getting a Darwin or someone who contributes something productive to society is so low, where I think he's arguing for it to be a more equal balance, where people have this time to be leisurely, but there's also a bit of time to work, so that that leisure time there's more of a chance that it's productive.
Yeah, he actually celebrates the slavery of ancient Athens and says, look, this was necessary for the creation of enduring cultural products. But the means of production have moved on since that time, such that injustice is no longer necessary to enjoy the fruits of leisure, and that they should be distributed in a more egalitarian fashion. Now, I suppose this means that certain kinds of activities are ruled out or made, let's say, less likely. So I'm imagining a sort of counterexample to Russell. You can tell me if you think this is feasible or if you think this is crazy. What if there is a certain kind of cultural product that even during a 4-hour workday would prove fatal to its cause? So, in a way, right? Like, I don't know what that would be. I don't know what that is, but something that required the entirety of your free mental space. Like, I don't know. Let's say that you were a painter and you're producing beautiful paintings, but you work in a frenzy. And if you had a 4-hour shift at Subway, it would take you out of the groove. And that cultural product would be impossible to create under those conditions. I wonder if Russell would be inclined to make an exception for these kinds of individuals, even though it seems like he's committed to saying that everybody owes 4 hours of labor.
Yeah. My intuition would be that he's pretty open to making exceptions. I don't think this is a hard and fast sort of rule that must be adhered to for him. To me, it seems a little bit more pragmatic in that sense.
It's a rough and ready guide. It's not an absolute moral requirement.
Yeah, I take this as him kind of putting out, this would be a more ideal and less absurd situation than we're finding ourselves in. The pin example, I appreciated a lot, where we see it so much that we're just overproducing things for the sake of producing things, and it's not good for human happiness, and it's really not good for the environment. So I take it to be that.
And again, I mean, maybe you just want your factory to get the greatest number of pin awards, for April. You want to hit some benchmark to make yourself look good to the board of directors or the CEO. And that's the kind of level of sociopathy that capitalism kind of operates under a lot of the time, is that we're so metrics oriented, focused only on the numbers, not on the purpose of the activity or let's say the quality of life that is produced by the activity, that it can obscure the real damage that's being done. So I think that, Russell's doing a great job here of kind of throwing the ball forward into history, and showing us the kinds of social issues that we're still struggling with, nearly a century later.
Yeah. One thing that I found really interesting was he is quite critical of blind capitalism here, but he also, because he's focusing on the intrinsic value we put on labor, if I'm reading him correctly, he's also critiquing the Russia at the time.
Yeah, the communists also get an elbow in the ribs here.
Yeah. I think he says their system could be a bit more ideal, but they still hold on to this fetishization of labor, seeing it as a good thing in itself. It was almost read to me. Let me try and find the passage here.
While you're doing that, I'll comment that his use here of the term slave morality is borrowed from Nietzsche, of course. But here the slave morality is the morality that valorizes labor as duty.
That was exactly the what I was going to point to. Yeah, exactly. It's almost a flip of the slave morality, where he says that throughout time it's kind of been imposed upon the workers that, oh, look how good you are, that you're making an honest living and working a good honest job. And this has kind of been passed down and culturally accepted, and that's why there continues to be an overemphasis on work, even under a different system than capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, he's pointing out the role of ideology in maintaining social conservative mores. Women come up in this regard, right? He's saying that, he makes a sort of feminist remark that women traditionally have been sort of brainwashed into thinking that, serving the family is their duty, and they have to subjugate their own individual personal interest to that, let's say, social convention at their own expense. And so what goes for women in feminism goes for workers under capitalism, right? And it's all about feeding the oppressed an ideology which keeps them under their own thumb, right? So it's the sort of uncritical philosophy presents itself as ideology, which is just a monolithic construct. It's not confronted as something to be analyzed and debated. It's presented as something that is a fact about the world, and it has the effect of paralyzing the people who buy into it and who stand by it as almost a point of pride, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really feel this in how it's been passed down, how we view work in general. I was I really like the sentence he said. One result is that we attach too little importance to the enjoyment and simple happiness, and that we do not judge production by the pleasure that it gives to the consumer. And I was thinking about how we tend to overwork ourselves, and when I get money, I like to do nothing for a while. And I think I've been viewed as lazy for doing that, where if you get money and you buy yourself something that's seen as a good, and it's a way of rewarding yourself for hard work. And so these simple pleasures are devalued in a way of just kind of being in the world, where continuing to be productive and having fruits of your labor is seen as a good in our culture. Yeah, I think that's been passed down.
Well, he says, right, that he makes a comment on this on what is on page 9 in our version, right? He says that the butcher who provides you with meat and the baker who provides you with bread are praiseworthy because they are making money. But when you enjoy the food they have provided, you are merely frivolous, unless you eat only to get strength for your work. Broadly speaking, it is held that getting money is good and spending money is bad. Seeing that they are two sides of one transaction, this is absurd. One might as well maintain that keys are good, but that keyholes are bad. So this shows the ridiculousness of this system, right? Which only valorizes one end of the transaction and debases the other. So it's an ideology with inherent flaws that betrays itself and contradicts itself in many ways.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't seem like there's any end to it or any point. It's, yeah.
Another contradiction that Russell points out, right, is that, you have on the one hand, the ideology or the ethics of labor, and then you have the manifest phenomenology of labor. And Russell points out that no real laborer valorizes their labor, right? And says, this is the most excellent thing that I could be producing or doing with my time, right? And he says, if that were the case, right, if the laborer's phenomenology were this is the best thing they could be doing, maybe we would have a good reason to put labor on the pedestal. But the fact is that most people who are, in Russell's terms, moving things around on the surface of the world don't value that activity, let's say, on a par with or greater than the works of Shakespeare, is evidence that this is appropriate to disvalue relatively to, let's say, cultural products that we could be producing that are in line with our own artistic visions or that engage our creative or critical faculties more fully.
Yeah, it's seen like as a necessary evil almost, that we need to do it, and if you think otherwise, then you're kind of being a bit too idealistic or pie in the sky. You don't understand how the world really works.
One of the things that struck me was that he described the university system as a more systematic way of producing what the leisure class produced by accident, right? So if we attribute all the fruits of culture to leisure, as Russell does here, then what the university represents is a kind of a garden, right? A hothouse, if you will, for producing those goods. And it's like finding a wild tomato, right? You're like, I'd like more of these. How do I produce more of these? Oh, I know. Well, I'll plant all these tomato vines in proximity to each other. I'll water them. I'll fertilize them. And that, I think, is what the so-called tenure system is supposed to be about in traditional academia, right? Is that you give somebody a guaranteed income for the rest of their lives so that then they can at least have a higher chance of producing these cultural goods. Yeah.
I thought that part was really interesting too. Yeah, where he talks about universities and how this is a good thing because it can bring about these social goods. But he also pointed out how it's it's odd when we have these institutions, but the rest of the world outside of them are solely concentrating on utilitarian concerns. So, I can sometimes, as someone who's coming back to college, see that where like taking an arts course or trying to get a degree in philosophy, the first question is always, what are you going to do with that? And it does feel, a little disconnected at times, I guess.
And do you condescend to them? Do you say, you poor brutalized soul, you can't see the joys and the goods that philosophy brings? I pity you.
I always hit them with, 'tis better to be Socrates unhappy than a pig satisfied.
And do they slap you immediately after you tell them that?
Yeah.
Usually, do you brace yourself? You wince a little bit in advance of,
oh yeah,
here comes the slap.
Yeah. It's justified.
Well, I think that's what Russell's sort of suggesting when he says that, we should have everybody, do the 4-hour workday. And then everybody who wants to be a scholar can be a scholar, not just this protected tenured class. The rest of the hours of your day can be used to do whatever you like, whether that's academic or artistic or, let's say traveling, anything you want to do with your free time, you can do that. You can live your best life, so to speak.
Yeah. I that's something I think about often, right? Like, in work culture, there's only a few capacities or certain capacities that are, valued above and beyond other ones.
How's your data entry skill?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And that's it. You're going to be entering data until your fingers are just bloody nubs.
Yeah. Like I think about, I have some friends who just lazy. They have no motivation to really do anything with their lives. But
do you want to call them out in the podcast? Do you want to?
No, I'm not going to do that.
Not going to shame?
No, I won't shame them.
Leisure shame?
Actually, I'm on Russell's side. I don't see that as a moral failing.
Okay.
In fact, I think
laziness is a virtue.
I guess because they're lazy in some ways, that in the traditional way of doing work or being a productive member of society. But I think that they give society a good because they're really, really funny, or maybe they're really compassionate. They bring people together, and they bring joy to my life. And I think that that's valuable, and that's not always something that you can measure, and it's not always valued.
Efficiency is not the only good, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're selecting your friends.
Yeah.
And your partners. I'm looking for a partner. They have to be really efficient in bringing me pleasure. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. Forget, good conversationalist, compassionate. None of that matters. Just efficiency. Mm-hmm. That would be sort of judging these things on the wrong scale.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. One passage I have highlighted here, maybe I'll get your thoughts on it. He said, "The fact is that moving matter about, while a certain amount of it is necessary to our existence, is emphatically not one of the ends of human life." I took that as him saying that labor is not our species being, as Marx might think that it is.
Right.
I was wondering maybe if you had any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think what he's describing is alienated labor. And I think that maybe Russell and Marx are closer aligned if you think about unalienated labor as what Russell is describing as leisure. Mm-hmm. Right? So, on paper, writing a play could be considered labor, unalienated labor. But that could also be done under what Russell construes as leisure time. So I feel like I think if we look at our terms carefully, the divide, the chasm's not that great.
Yeah. There's not much disagreement between there. Just
and there's
phrasing.
lots of pro-socialist messaging in this article, even if there is, by the same token, anti-communist lashes sort of being made by Russell here and there, saying that they sort of failed their socialist ideals and have actually just taken on the same role as the capitalist bosses in ideologically blinding and bullying their citizens.
The angle he took was one that I'd never heard before, where it's the same valuing labor in itself and upholding the good worker. I thought, that was an interesting position.
So the utopian upswing here, right? If we phase out work gradually and everybody is equally entitled to their share of the leisure time that has traditionally been absorbed and monopolized by the leisure class, once this occurs, presumably we're going to have a flowering of civilization.
Mm-hmm. That seems to be the crux of his argument, especially towards the end. He got quite flowery, and it strikes me as a little idealistic, but not to the point of being so utopian it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, could you see this happening, right? So let's say that you free up the working class, you free up half of their productive time, and you also take the unemployed and you award them 4 hours of labor. So anybody who is involuntarily unemployed, suddenly they have the 4 hours that they need to sort of structure their lives around. What will predictably happen? Now, I'm going to say that there's a large number of people, perhaps myself included, who are used to working 8-hour days wherein at least 4 are wasted, or inefficient in some way. So it takes me a couple of hours in front of the computer to kind of get rid of the distractions, calm my mind, and start composing or concentrating or functioning. If we are down to a 4-hour workday, we got to get right to business, right? So the tone and, let's say, feel of a workday is going to be different for those people who now feel a constriction of their labor hours. And also, right, the people who are used to having 8 hours of leisure are similarly going to feel the pressure of 4 hours of intense labor, not 8 hours of like diffuse labor, but 4 hours of intense labor to get their allotment done. Like, here's the thing: if you take a simple task down to the point where we only have to do 5 minutes of labor a day, right? If we get to that point of society and civilization and technology where everybody only has a 5-minute allotment, we're not going to be able to get anything done. Right? Imagine that we had an hour in this office, an hour of work to do, and we're hot desking my office here.
Yeah.
And so I sit down for 5 minutes. I barely get at the keyboard. I make a few keystrokes, and then the next one tags in. The next worker tags in. And then it's just a parade of workers, all putting in their 5 minutes in my office. I'm going to say that at that point, maybe there's a reason not to have an equal distribution of labor.
Yeah.
Like at that point, it would be ridiculous to insist on this kind of strict equality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess, that's why in any system having flexibility is important, because for some tasks, having that time at the water cooler is important to being able to get any work done, or sitting blankly at a screen for a while and just getting yourself into the zone. On the other hand, there's sometimes just get in there, get it done, and get out, right?
To be sort of provocative and also glib, you might also think as a torturer, right? You're just getting warmed up after 4 hours, right? They're about to talk, and now my shift's over. The next guy's got to start again. Well, that's bad for the torturer and the torturee at that point, because you get this next rapport going. There's just some things that you do that 4 hours won't be enough, and of course I'm sort of maybe, there are less grim examples. They're sort of failing to come to mind, but I don't know, let's say speech writing or something. If you're in the flow, you want to keep going, it seems like you should be able to work more than 6 hours. Just like I said that maybe playwrights who shouldn't be forced to work 4 hours a day because it breaks their flow of, leisure production. Maybe, similarly, there could be some people who need to work more than 4 hours to get done what they need to get done.
One thing that comes to mind here is because he's talking about labor in a modern context and how technology has enabled us to become much more fruitful in our labor. And he was writing this, you said this was in between this First and Second World War. Okay, yeah. So 80, almost 90 years ago, something like that. And technology has improved so much now in so many facets of our life. If things were structured differently, maybe some of those jobs that are no longer necessary to have workers at can go away, and we leave more time to do those tasks or jobs that, maybe you want to stick around there for a bit longer.
Yeah. I'm guessing that there's entire categories of labor to which there inhere no intrinsic value, right? So I'm thinking of something like toilet cleaning, right? For a relatively able and well-adjusted individual, I'm assuming that cleaning a toilet doesn't provide any great degree of satisfaction or sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody wants to do that.
Well, I mean, it's fine. You can feel some sort of passing satisfaction at a clean bowl that you've, helped bring about. But I don't know if it's the high point of anybody's day, right? It's not something that, you dream about.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to get to work tomorrow and make all those bowls clean, right?
Yeah.
And so that might speak to the fact that there are some categories of labor that would just make human life better if they were altogether eliminated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm just to call back to my earlier provocative example. Torture might be one of those, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you are looking to that as a sort of end or as a great joy, there might be something wrong with the person who sees this as a great accomplishment or a specialized art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess with the toilet cleaner example, if we are trying to, under sort of Russell's guidance, move to a system of labor that is more equitable, who is going to be the one who cleans toilets, even if it is 4 hours a day, right? That's always going to be a problem, I think. Well,
what's the Marxist maxim, right? From each according to their abilities, to each according to their need. So by that rationale, right? This is terrible, right? In some sense, how do we weigh contributions to society? You're gonna feel really rough if the universal administrator or whoever's in charge of society looks at your file and says, you know what, we studied your lack of accomplishments, for the last 20 years, and we've decided that, in our wisdom, this is the best thing you could be doing to help out. And so you're just rubbing crap off of porcelain for the rest of your adult life, right? That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume.
Yeah, I don't think that's anyone's dream.
Right.
Maybe one person.
That's going to be a hard letter to open.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I guess that it suggests that, right? If we can't build a machine to do these kinds of things, it has to fall to someone. What is the equitable method of selection that we would coordinate on, right? In other words, how do we pick the right person for the right reason to do this undesirable task.
Maybe we just have 20-minute shifts for toilet cleaning.
You're just getting into it after 20 minutes. That's just when you stop retching, you know.
Yeah.
You just started getting into the flow.
Yeah, you got your clothes all wet already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just ruins the rest of your day, doesn't it?
Yeah, fair enough. One thing, I guess, while we're talking about things that are towing utopia, I did a few times. I have a little sentence here that made me think of the ant and the grasshopper, Bernard Suits version that we read in your class. He said, a man who has worked long hours all his life will become bored if he becomes suddenly idle. But without a considerable amount of leisure, a man is cut off from many of the best things. So I was thinking about, I've worked with older people who, when they retire, they disintegrate and really have no purpose left in their life. And this reminds me of the ant in this fable that Bernard Suits talks about. He spends all the winter collecting all the food he needs, and there's a grasshopper, and he's just out there playing games the whole time, enjoying himself. And the ant is so worried about the future that in a turn of events where it's no longer needed to labor all the time, the ant doesn't know what to do with itself, where the grasshopper has spent all this time creating games.
Right. And Suits kind of identifies this as a neurotic attachment to work, right? In a post-instrumental culture where material scarcity is the norm, insisting on working just means that you're doing something that has lost its purpose, it's lost its reason. And so you'll experience meaninglessness and purposelessness as a result of engaging in it. So think about like a Roomba that's cleaning a room that's already been cleaned hundreds of times and no one's been in the room. The Roomba just keeps like sliding around on the clean floor. It's not doing anything anymore, right? It is absurd activity, right? And so think about like a human that in a world where straightening pins are no longer needed, they still want to make pins, and that's all they want to do. There's something wrong with that kind of person. And according to Russell, right, if we produce these kinds of individuals as a culture, this is actually an indictment of our culture. It means that our culture doesn't know what to do with leisure, which means it has a kind of brutalized sense of what it is to be human. I think this is brought out on a quote on page 9 in our version. Russell says, he said, it will be said that while a little leisure is pleasant, men would not know how to fill their days if they had only 4 hours of work out of the 24. Insofar as this is true in the modern world, it is a condemnation of our civilization. It would not have been true at any earlier period. There was formerly a capacity for lightheartedness and play, which has to some extent been inhibited by the cult of efficiency. Right? And so this is exactly what he's talking about, is that let's say, he talks a lot about folk dancing and earlier, more innocent times in human civilization where before this duty of labor or this overemphasis on productivity took hold, people knew how to have a good time. They knew how to play. They knew how to have fun. They knew how to socialize. And if you deform and warp human activity to the point where all you care about are the fruits of their labor, there's nothing left at the end of that worth celebrating. There's no reason to dance anymore. You've impoverished the realm of human experience considerably.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate. For me, I think what makes life meaningful is realizing as many capacities as you can in the fullest extent you can. And if you're just making pins your whole life, there's very few capacities that you're exploring and meaningful relationships to the world that you're building. And that is a worse state of affairs. So yeah, I think if we can set more time aside for play and games in general, I think that's a world worth pursuing.
Yeah. I mean, the threat of a world without 4 hours of labor, right, is the world where maybe people cling on to their former jobs because they have almost sort of a sunk cost fallacy. They've spent their whole lives up to this point making pins or computer chips or whatever. And now, when that is no longer needed, or when they are no longer needed to do that in a state of retirement or mass retirement in the case of material superabundance, they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so, there is something to this idea that we need to prepare ourselves for being inessential in some way. We have a duty to ourselves and to society to think ahead to the point when we are, either by the force of technological advances or by our own lack of ability, made redundant. And so what are we going to do at that point? Are we going to be a burden to ourselves and others? Or are we going to find something to do that gives meaning to our lives? And I think that's the existential challenge behind all of this, right? And obviously Russell puts it in terms of sociology and economics and says, look, there are bigger forces at work here, right? There's a power dynamic, and there's a reason that people are ideologically blinkered. It's to keep the poor in their place. As long as they learn to love work and they support the leisure class will be happy to promote that false ideology as that labor is valorous. And they themselves will do no labor, or they'll do as little as possible. I think I lost my thread there.
No, I think, this is why I think I'm doing important work when I do nothing. The future needs me to be lazy and spend my Sundays staring at ceiling tiles.
I remember that so much of my childhood was spent in worry and hard labor and study, that when I was a teenager and finally had some time to myself and I could be independent of the family, I remember just taking my bicycle up to the provincial park near my home and just lying down in the grass and just feeling the sun on my face and lying in the grass. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever felt this free before. Right. And that's pretty extreme. Mm-hmm. Right, that what this generation calls touching grass. Yeah, I hadn't really had the freedom or leisure to just do that. There was always some pressure from somewhere to do something, which I don't know if that's common experience for a lot of people, but freedom for me was intoxicating, and it was something to be cherished. And after I left home, I immediately started to carve out as much free time as I could in my own life. People who look at my career path might see more of the grasshopper than the ant, although maybe there's some sort of combination. It's a bit like I've worked so hard at being free that perhaps there is some sort of neurosis in that itself.
Yeah, I definitely feel that sense. I think part of me values laziness so much as a reaction to our culture of valuing work so much. Like it's this is proof of how online I am, but there's these, influencers that are, grind set mindset. Every day you just gotta go for it and do your best. And I almost as a reaction to that, I
I mean, like the Mr. Beasts of the world.
Yeah. It just seems sad in a way, and
yeah, it's like a circus bear who refuses to get off its ball. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, the circus bear, presumably before it was trained to sort of stand on that ball, it had its own interests. It had its own species being that it, conformed to by instinct, and it was probably a happier creature. But once it's fed and praised and reinforced for standing on that ball, it becomes the only thing it wants to do, right? And that's the worry that we are being conditioned by our culture, by our workplaces, to identify ourselves solely as the function we perform for others.
Yeah.
And that's clearly pathetic when placed in comparison with a more self-directed, robust series of life projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I know it's hard to disagree. Right? No, I think actually the counterpoint would just be that no, we need work to keep the guardrails on because we're not ready for it. We're not ready for robust, self-directed programs of self-realization.
I do think it's still important, even if it is maybe a banality, and at some level, it's important to reiterate because we still do live in a culture that does look upon laziness as a moral failing, and even just the term laziness, I think, is mapped onto many things that are not that, and that's unfortunate.
Right. So here we're going to get into some fine-grained term crunching. So, in your understanding, how would leisure be distinct from idleness, and how would idleness be distinct from laziness?
Okay, I think leisure is time that you put aside to pursue interests that you find fulfilling.
Now, mind you, I mean, what Russell says here is that there is a distinction between active and passive leisure. This is on page 10. And he values active leisure over passive leisure, right? He says, he writes, the pleasures of urban populations have become mainly passive, seeing cinema, watching football matches, listening to the radio, and so on. This results from the fact that their active energies are fully taken up with work. If they had more leisure, they would again enjoy pleasures in which they took an active part. So it seems like he's valuing, in terms of like leisure time, the things that that you say that we value, he does have a hierarchy implicit in that.
Yeah. This actually passage made me think a lot about how, and yeah, maybe this is a distinction for me between leisure and idleness, how we have free time that we put aside nowadays, but we fill that up with so many things. I hesitate to demonize social media more than it already has been, but I think, things like social media or binge watching Netflix or just, having something going on at all times is a type of, maybe that second category of leisure time that it's not.
So you think that passive leisure is synonymous with idleness?
I think I'd need to think about my terms a bit more here.
See, to me, right, idleness is something separate from going to the cinema or the opera, right? I mean, even what Russell identifies as passive leisure seems to be distinct from idleness. To me, idleness describes not just a passive enjoyment of something, but like a passive enjoyment of nothing in particular, right? So like just sitting there and being strikes me as idleness. Right, so I'm idle right now. I'm not running into the cinema to watch a show. That seems to be a different level again of activity, even though, of course, relatively it's passive compared to, say, playing football or something. But so let's say that idleness is like just being, right? So that's the sort of neutral state of humanity. Now, it seems that laziness describes something different. That's something that most people identify as vicious behavior. So, I mean, laziness seems to be normally couched in terms of, you know that you should be doing something and yet you are refusing to do it. It's a kind of what Aristotle called a crasia, right? Like you have a weakness of will. You know that you ought to do your laundry, but you're not. And that's different than idleness. Idleness seems to me like you have nothing in particular to do and you're not doing it, but there's no need to do it. And so you can kind of enjoy idleness, whereas it seems that laziness is a kind of dirty enjoyment. Like it's like, I know I should be doing so many other things.
Yeah.
And I'm doing none of them. Just in a bloody-minded kind of stubborn mule kind of way.
Yeah, that's a good distinction because I think like laziness is the opposite of realizing capacities. Maybe leisure time you can use to do something intrinsically valuable. For me, reading a book or playing guitar, that's time that I really valuable. It feels good. Laziness is when I have that free time and I refuse to do those things, even though I know it'll make me feel good and I'll enjoy it more than doom scrolling on my phone.
But here's the question, right? Where does who is fit to make that judgment, right? Who's fit to make the judgment in your life as to what constitutes passive leisure, mere idleness, or vicious laziness?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's up to the individual person.
But I mean, we still do make moral judgments, right? We say, that guy's just lazy, right? I mean, people make those kinds of judgments, rightly or wrongly. Mm-hmm. It seems that we're prone to pass judgment.
Yeah. I think oftentimes, though, those judgments are wrong. And that's why I try not to do it. I guess I can't not do it, but yeah.
I mean, you're sort of reacting to the world, right? You can try to not have that reaction. Mm-hmm. But if someone is just bone lazy, if they, let's say they're eating and they drop their fork and they refuse to pick up their fork, like, oh, whatever.
I've been there. I'll just use my hands.
Whatever. I mean, you might, rightly or wrongly, you might have a knee-jerk reaction to that and say, you're just lazy. You're the laziest person I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You won't even pick up what you drop.
Yeah. Or the kid who just refuses to help out with dishes or, that's a fair distinction. And, the term exists for a reason. So
it's an indictment.
Yeah.
Whereas if I say, I'm enjoying some idle time, it's that's less, morally loaded. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Say today I'm being lazy.
Maybe the two are just, in my view, conflated too much or too often. Yeah.
I mean, So let's try to arrive at a verdict on the article. So we discussed Sontag's piece, and we thought that it was a bit hyperbolic in the end. Do you find Russell's piece to be convincing? Do you find it to be worthwhile, or do you find it to be unconvincing and not worthwhile?
I am a big fan of this essay. I think it's definitely something that is something that we should strive for and seems realistic. Maybe he is a bit idealistic towards the end. I think he was talking about all the flourishing of human nature, and that it seemed a bit flowery to me, but in a way that I liked and I didn't find super objectionable. There's very little in this essay that I took issue with.
Yeah, I think that it's relatively benign. It seems well reasoned and not overly ideologically coded. It's an original contribution. It is flowery in that it tries to be persuasive, right, about advocating for a 4-hour workday. My only criticism, I suppose, is that he could have gone a bit deeper in the weeds and explain how he arrived at this particular number and what would the effects be if there was a 0-hour working day on the table, right? So he left that to future writers to imagine. But then again, you might think that in his day and age, this was a radical enough proposal, and to get it accepted in the mind of the general public, which is what he's appealing to in this article, he maybe felt he couldn't get deeper into the numbers and couldn't get deeper into the sort of more abstract theoretical objections and hinge cases that could be sort of levied against this position.
Yeah. Like you said, general audience. I'm always surprised, like when I learn something new about Bertrand Russell, just how ahead of his time he was in so many aspects, how far-sighted he was into the future. It's always a pleasure to read something that he's written.
It's interesting because, often Russell's praised for his, more rigorous early phase and, his later more populist public philosopher phase is decried and discredited. But I think that, he's an example of a philosopher activist. We don't see that very often. And I think that that's an important role that at least some philosophers can play and take on, and who aren't afraid of getting involved in controversy. And of course, Russell, conscientious objector to wars of all kinds, gets in trouble a lot in Britain for this. He paid some price in his personal life for the stances he took. I think that generally speaking, we could do with seeing more of these figures in the public discourse. That's generally been inhibited by the online, let's say, echo chamber, where if you say something that doesn't reinforce dominant values, you can be canceled or, decried and punished, right? And so I think that, even the people who are maybe critical of the later Russell's lack of rigor still should give credit where credit is due and acknowledge the importance of these position pieces, which really do argue for the betterment of everyone's lot, in society, and to try to remedy some radical injustice, which has been allowed to stand for far too long.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that he's not hyperbolic and he's not overly...
Well, there's a little bit of that here. I mean, there's...
Yeah, a little, but as far as his claims go, he's not overly utopian, I guess, though idealistic.
Yeah, he's beating a drum, and in a way that I think is more convincing than not, and that presciently looked into the future in a way that people from his historical perspective often did not. There's no flying cars here. There's just more leisure than historically the majority of humankind have been able to enjoy, and a very candid and clear discussion about what that entails for our culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Dan. See you next week.
All right.